You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, we've done 50 of these podcasts, so that must make today's episode number 51. Is that correct?
Yeah. 1 year in the making.
Yeah, 1 year in the making. And so we decided for episode 51, so we would do something a little bit different. And so we brought on a guest, and there are two things that I wanted to, we'll bring the guest on in a moment. But there are two things that I wanted to mention about having a guest today. One is that it won't be every episode. So we'll still be doing the podcast once a week, and we'll have a guest about once every month. That's one thing. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention was that the format will still be the same. So it'll still be a short podcast, about 12 to 15 minutes, even on the days when we bring a guest on. Because, we don't want to take up a lot of the listeners' time. So those are the two things I wanted to mention. Is that about covered, Alper?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So today's guest is named Tom Tran. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Excited to be one of your first guests on the podcast.
And Tom is an associate brand manager at a pharmaceuticals company in the U.S., and for his job, he produces a lot of presentations for himself and for others. And in fact, presentation work is so much a passion of his that he joined the Presentation Guild, which is how I know him. And he runs a website, tomkytran.com. And Tom, by the way, the KY in Tom KY Tran, what does that stand for?
Yeah, so that was the name my parents gave me when I was born. So just a little fun story. Before I was born, I actually had two brothers who both died. So my parents, when they gave birth to me, their family in the countryside was like, okay, you have to give your son a bad name so that he survives, so that the spirits leave him alone. And so they originally named me Kai, which means special, but they changed my name to be Tom, which means shrimp. And so that's kind of where the Tom Kai Tran comes from. I'm still here.
Well, I know that I'm laughing. That was kind of a sad story, but I'm laughing because of your name. I think that's kind of funny. Yeah, so anyway, like I said, Tom runs a website, tomkytran.com. And it's mostly about presentations, particularly about how to use PowerPoint to tell your story. And Tom also teaches university students about to enter the business world, how to design good business presentations. So Tom, before I get to the burning question that we have for you today, tell me about the intro. Is there anything that I left out or that you'd like to build on?
No, you did great.
All right. And one other thing before our question for you, Tom, just so I don't forget this later. Tell our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
You can just shoot me an email at tomkytran@gmail.com.
Okay. So the burning question that we have for you today, Tom, is that you use a phrase on your website, compelling business story. So when I saw that, I wondered, what does Tom mean by that, compelling business story? If I am, say, hypothetically a supply chain manager or a finance manager, or say an associate brand manager, and I come up to you and I say, Tom, I want to tell compelling business stories too. Tell me how to do that. What advice do you have for me?
Yeah, so, I'll speak to you as if you were an associate brand manager joining our team.
Okay.
And so just a little bit more of the context, kind of what and how this role works is, you're most likely a recent MBA grad and enroll at a big CPG type company on a big brand. And in this role, you have weekly meetings with the general manager. Sometimes they're every other week, and sometimes they're weekly. And you have to produce a presentation or a slide deck for each of these meetings. And the challenge always is what's the story? What's going on? How's the business doing? But what the trap is, if you're kind of someone new into the role, it's easy just to go to these meetings and say, okay, sales were up or down by this percent. This stat, that stat, here's our out of stock rate, here's our service level. You can just go back to back with numbers. But that's kind of what you do if you're totally new, first time in this meeting. A better way to handle this type of meeting is to try to look at the data and try to pull the story together before you go into this meeting with the VPs. And so that's kind of what I mean when I say try to make it a story. And because these meetings are every week, you can't have a new novel story every single week. There's not a new campaign that launches. There's not a new product that launches. Those would all be a great foundation for a story. But even though you can't come with a full story every single week, that's always the North Star. So for example, a few examples of like a good story in this type of context where you're meeting with the GM would be that, hey, we saw that we were losing market share for the last few months. But we decided, and because of that, we decided to launch a new form factor. We started working with a new creative agency, and we were able to get our buyer to take our product and put it in a new aisle in store. And because of all that, we were able to win back 10 points of share, which is huge. So that's kind of like a good type of story that you can bring to the meeting that would get everyone really excited, because there was a problem that was identified, there was a solution that everyone aligned on and we took action on, and then there was like a nice outcome for the business. So that would be my advice. If you want to tell a good story, try to frame it up and see what the opportunity or challenge was, what you were able to do or get the team to do together by pulling together your cross-functional partners, looking at all the data, putting a plan together, and then acting on that plan, and then being able to share what the ultimate outcome was.
So I've got a question about this, and so it seems like you'd have to have a fair amount of context in order to know what kind of story to construct. So in your experience, can like a new employee who has just started at the company, do they have enough context to make a story?
No, I think it takes time. It takes time to learn the business. It's the business that I'm on, the brand that I'm with, it's about $500 million a year in top line revenue or sales. And so, yeah, it takes time to kind of really ramp up. And because we're a big company, there's so much data. We work with, market research agencies. We have our own internal in-house market research, market insights team. There's Nielsen data, which is what every CPG brand that you go to the grocery store in the US, that's kind of what they all use to record every transaction that scans at the register. So there's a ton of data. And so the challenge in this role is being able to sift through all of that and kind of pull together what's really important. Hey, we launched in this channel, we got distribution, and because of that, we were able to win share. And as we were increasing our distribution, our velocity continued to grow, which is like how fast we sell the product. And so we know that this is like it's going to be one of our key items in our new portfolio. I think kind of pulling things together like that and tying it all together and not getting too lost in the weeds and the detail is really important for this type of role.
Okay. So I've got another question, but Alper, before I hog all the questions, did you have anything that at this point that you wanted to jump in with?
I have a question on my mind. Maybe it will be related to the one you have as well, but I'm not sure. Tom, you said these meetings are weekly, right? I mean, we're still going from the hypothetical example, but it wouldn't be the first time I hear about these weekly meetings. And for example, in these meetings, does everybody take turns presenting something? Do they always use a slide deck? How do they go?
Yeah, there's always a slide deck. We love our PowerPoint.
So it's obligatory that you come with a slide deck. Can you say, hey, I took some notes, I'm going to share the current situation or some obstacles to tackle with you. Are you actually expected to reflect a slide on the wall or something?
Yeah, there is always a slide deck. So the meetings with the general manager in person are every other week, but I meet with my team and the director every week and look at a version of it, and that we just email to the broader org. And that's like the distribution method. That's more like a document. I think we say presentation, and it's kind of half business document and half presentation. It's not the type of presentation where you're on stage standing up and speaking. You're in a conference room with 10 other people seated down looking at it, but it's also on screen at the same time. So it's kind of like, it kind of has to be both a business document and a presentation, kind of like somewhere in the middle.
Did you ever question whether it was did you ever question their necessity? Like,
Yeah,
did you ever question, is there a more efficient way of doing this or a better way of doing this?
I have. And, it's been done this way for so long, and it's what the general manager expects and wants. And as people who are on his team, you kind of have to just go with the program.
I
Um,
understand. And I hear
it's-
that probably more often than anything else that I hear in the corporate environment. And I'm almost fascinated by that.
Yeah, because it's quite a sprint to put together, a 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50-page deck. And some of the slides are kind of, updating tables and charts. But I think the core 10 or 20 slides, you are trying to pull together a story and try to weave together all these facts and trying to explain what's going on in the market. What are competitors doing? What are we doing? And what does the next 8 weeks, 12 weeks look like for the business? And it's quite a heavy lift, to be quite
I
frank.
can
So
imagine.
it's a role that new MBAs have to go through in order to prove themselves. And once you have, then you get a nicer, I would say, less demanding in terms of like that weekly sprint.
Well, Matt, this obligatory situation has triggered my grumpy gene, so I'm sure I'll come back with a follow-up question. But in the meantime, I'll leave it up. I'll leave the floor to you.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, Tom, how long were you at this company before you felt like you understood the situation well enough to put together one of these decks?
I would say, I feel like when you're new in a role, you kind of are both kind of like, so when I started the role, the person who was transitioning to me, she's like, Tom, you got to learn how to do this because I'm going on vacation next week. And so I had 1 week to really onboard. And so it was kind of a curse and a blessing because it was just so overwhelming. These huge decks are like very, very detail oriented and require like a lot of heavy lifting on the analytics side. But after she was gone, I had to do it. I had no option. Then I was like, okay, I kind of got this now. But it takes time to really understand all the metrics that are involved with running a consumer packaged goods business. And, even people who have been there a long time aren't super familiar with some of the kind of facts that are available to understand and diagnose potential issues or look for potential opportunities to grow the business. So, I feel like as I've been in the role for 1.5 years, I still feel like I'm learning more and more. And so I think that's just a part of, as you learn more, you realize how little you knew back then.
Yeah, I'll bet. So we're about running out of time for today. But one thing that came up during the conversation with Tom, and we won't have time to address it today, but one thing that I found very interesting was that in the conversation, Tom mentioned something about something that, or what did you call them, Tom? Send-aheads, I think you called them. Documents that you send ahead of the presentation, or documents that you would like to send ahead of the presentation. And our very first episode, Alper, I think was, we did an episode, our very first episode was on leave behinds. So the kind of the opposite. And so I would love to, and we won't have time for it today, but maybe on some episode in the future, I would love to hear more about the opportunity for a send ahead, because it sounds like a send ahead would be a great way to deal with these challenges that you're having.
I think so.
Yeah.
It sounds, technically it sounds like quite the opposite, like send ahead versus leave behind. But I have the feeling that they would serve the same purpose of prepping the audience, or I think the main purpose would be separating between what you tell me personally in front of me and what you want me to expect on my own time without you in the room, maybe pay more specific attention to. And I believe they should be different. The theme that we had talked about in that episode was the necessity to make them different files. I have the feeling that the same would apply for send aheads as well.
Yeah. So let's wrap it up here for now. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today, Tom.
Thank you.
And we will see you again next week then.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.